It's 10 o'clock. My name is James Sproula, and I'll be the master of ceremonies for this meeting. Our chairman, Bill White, will act as our chairman when we get to the formal business, but it's my honor and privilege to welcome you to the CHAR annual general meeting. We hope this is the last one that'll be done this way, virtually, and we hope to be back in person so we can shake hands and meet and greet and get to know each other on a more personal basis. But we'll do the best we can virtually. It's our third time virtually, and again, hopefully the last. I'd like to acknowledge and thank our shareholders. We originally had 211 shareholders when we did the qualifying transaction and merged Covista Capital with CHAR. Of the 211, I know over 200 of those are still shareholders, and we thank them for their ongoing support. We now have well over 500 shareholders. Those 200 back from the original days have been terrific and have stuck with us, and we're thankful for that. I'd also like to mention 3 new shareholders that have come and joined the CHAR family over the last couple of years. Lee Jones Gable, and specifically Chris Wardle out in Vancouver and Grady Savage in Toronto, deserve a mention. Over the last 2 years, we've raised $11 million, more than half of that as a result of the work of Lee Jones Gable, specifically Chris and Grady to a lesser extent, but that group of Lee Jones Gable has been a terrific support to us, so thanks to them. The second I'd like to mention is Covista Capital. Rand Cannon and Spencer McCosham run this fund out of Vancouver. So we've got lots of friends in Vancouver today. They were our first institutional investors. They've been a key shareholder, and they've been great supporters. And the third I'd like to mention is the Small Cap Discoveries Group, Paul Andriola and Trevor Terwicki. They've been great supporters as well. So thanks to all of our shareholders, but those 3 sort of groups in particular have been terrific over the last couple of years, and we thank them for that. Before we get to the formal business, I would like to give one little anecdote. I've talked in the past about how our business and the business of clean tech and CHAR specifically has been well positioned. And back in the early days, we used to share the odd article. There'd be a Globe and Mail article or a Toronto Star article and say, hey, isn't this great that things are going our way in our industry? Well, today I've got yesterday, and the day before is Globe and Mail. So today's report on business, and it's not on the front page, but if you go and just open the fold, we've got 4 articles in these 2 pages. Climate change putting 4% of global GDP at risk by 2050, new study estimates. World events are further complicating Canada's green energy transition. Infrastructure Bank CEO welcomes investment in EV charging stations. Alberta aims to be Canada's hydrogen hotspot. 2 full pages on the business of environment in today's paper. How about yesterday? How about the front page above the fold? Ottawa fails on climate policies. Watchdog. Environment Commissioner criticizes federal government's carbon pricing system. Right on topic for CHAR. And how about the day before? Let's go to the front page of the report on business. And what have we got? Why Germany is looking to Canada for its future supply of hydrogen. I can go on. Every single day, CHAR's business is in the newspaper, in the Globe and Mail. And if you look, and my kids tell me the newspaper is yesterday's news, fair enough. But I still think it's a strong indicator of what's going on in the world and how we in our business are well positioned to take advantage of the opportunities that are going to be brought by not just cleaning up the environment, but by that triple bottom line that's good for humanity, and it's going to bring profits for us and for our shareholders. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bill White. Bill, for those of you that are new to CHAR this year, he spent most of his career with DuPont. I met Bill about 10 years ago. He was retiring from DuPont Canada, where he was the CEO. He was also on the Canadian Council of CEOs, has had an amazing career as a professional director, as a businessman, and he's been a fantastic, not only contributor to CHAR, but he's been a mentor to both me and to Andrew White. He's been a great supporter of our business and to us personally. So Bill, I'd like to pass the chair to you so we can go through the formal business.
Okay, well, thank you, James. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to the 2022 annual and special meeting of shareholders of CHAR Technologies Limited, and I will act as chairman of this meeting. As stated in the Management Information Circular in order to proactively deal with the impact of COVID-19 and in compliance with the provincial and federal guidelines regarding public gatherings, shareholders have been encouraged not to attend this meeting in person, but to vote by proxy and in advance of the meeting, and to join via the Zoom video conference line to attend the meeting virtually. As noted in the circular, you will not be able to vote or to change any previous proxy vote over the video conference line. On behalf of the corporation, I thank you for your forbearance and cooperation during these trying times. So the meeting will now come to order, and with your approval, I shall ask Andrew Todd to act as secretary of the meeting and Amy Cam of TSX Trust Company to act as scrutineer. I now instruct the secretary to table the meeting the following documents: the notice of meeting, the instrument of proxy, the management information circular dated March 30th, 2022, and the audited financial statements and management's discussion and analysis of the corporation for the fiscal year ended September 30th, 2021. I also confirm that the material was sent to each director and the corporation's auditors. These documents are tabled in order that any shareholder may examine those same if required. In view of the fact that the notes of the meeting and the statutory declaration proving the service in accordance with the relevant bylaws of the corporation have been tabled and are available for inspection, we'll now entertain a motion that the reading of the notice of meeting and the statutory declaration proving service thereof be dispensed with.
I move that the reading of the notice of the meeting and the statutory declaration proving service thereof be dispensed with.
I second that motion.
It's now been moved and seconded that the reading of the notice of meeting and the statutory declaration proving service thereof be dispensed with. All those in favor signify by raising their hand. Any contrary? Hearing none, the motion is carried unanimously. Would the scrutineer please report the number of shareholders present in person and the total number of shares they represent, together with the number of shares represented by proxy?
I hereby report that there are one shareholder present in person, represented by represented by proxy as one holder, and the total shares represented was 709,300.
Thank you. So there is a quorum present, and proof of notice calling this meeting has been given in accordance with the corporation's bylaws and the Business Corporations Act of Ontario. I now declare that the meeting is regularly called and properly constituted for the transaction of business, and instruct the secretary to make the declaration of mailing and attached exhibit as Schedule A to the minutes of this meeting. So I now present to the meeting the consolidated statements of financial position and related financial statements of the corporation as at September 30th, 2021, together with the report thereon of the auditors of the corporation to the shareholders. Copies of such documents have been mailed to all shareholders, and it is not proposed to read them to the meeting. Unless anyone objects, I will now ask that someone move and someone second a resolution that the auditor's report be taken as read.
I move that the auditor's report on the financial statements of the corporation for the fiscal year ended September 30th, 2021 be taken as read.
And I second that motion.
All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Any contrary? Hearing none, the motion was carried unanimously. Election of directors. It is now in order to proceed with the election of directors for the ensuing year. Accordingly, 8 directors are to be elected, and I declare the meeting open for nominations.
I nominate the following persons as directors of the corporation for the ensuing year: William White, Eric Butel, James Sproula, Benjamin Glander, Jane Pagel, Nick Nanos, Paul Pellegrini, and Hugh Cleland.
And I will second that motion.
The nominees named are nominees of management as disclosed in the circular. Are there any further nominations? Okay, hearing none. Would someone move that the nominations be closed?
I move that nominations be closed.
And I second that motion.
All those in favor signify by raising their hand. Any contrary? Motion's carried unanimously. I hereby declare the nominations closed. Would someone move and therefore would someone move therefore a resolution for the election of those persons nominated as directors?
I move that William White, Eric Butel, James Sproula, Benjamin Galander, Jane Pagel, Nick Nanos, Paul Pellegrini, and Hugh Cleland be and hereby elected as directors of the corporation to hold office until the next annual meeting or until their successors are elected or appointed.
I will second that motion.
All those in favor signify by raising their hand. Any contrary? The motion was carried unanimously. I hereby declare those persons duly elected as directors of the corporation. The next item of business is a resolution appointing auditors for the ensuing year and authorizing the directors to fix their remuneration. As noted in the circular, DMCL LLP were first appointed as auditors for the corporation on December 12th, 2018. Would someone move, therefore, the reappointment of DMCL LLP as the auditors of the corporation and to authorize the directors to fix their remuneration?
I move that DMCL LLP Chartered Accountants be appointed as auditors of the corporation for the ensuing year to serve at such remuneration as may be fixed by the board of directors.
I second that motion.
All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Any contrary? The motion's carried unanimously. I declare that DMCL LLP Chartered Accountants are appointed as the auditors of the corporation for the ensuing year or until their successors are appointed to serve at such remuneration as may be fixed by the board of directors. The next item of business is to consider and, if deemed advisable, to pass with or without variation, an ordinary resolution to amend the 2021 Omnibus Plan to make it compliant with the exchange's new policy 4.4, all as set out on pages 25 to 28 and Schedule A of the circular. Are there any questions from shareholders relating to this resolution? In order for this resolution to be effective, it must be passed by a majority of the votes cast at this meeting, excluding the votes of insiders and their associates as described in the circular. If there are no questions, I would request a motion to approve the amended and restated Omnibus Plan.
And here it is. Be it resolved as an ordinary resolution that the amended and restated Omnibus Long-Term Incentive Plan of CHAR Technologies Limited, the corporation, substantially in the form as attached in Schedule A to the Management Information Circular of the corporation dated March 30th, 2022, the amended and restated Omnibus Plan, A&R Omnibus Plan, which amends and restates the Omnibus Long-Term Incentive Plan of the corporation adopted by the Board of Directors of the corporation on February 25th, 2021, and approved by the shareholders of the corporation on March 30th, 2021, with such other conforming changes as the Board of Directors of the corporation considers necessary or appropriate, is hereby ratified, confirmed, and approved. B, the reservation for the issuance from Treasury pursuant to options under the A&R Omnibus Plan and under any other security-based compensation arrangements adopted by the corporation of up to 10% of the issued and outstanding common shares of the corporation from time to time is hereby ratified, confirmed, and approved. C, the reservation for issuance from Treasury under the A&R Omnibus Plan pursuant to share appreciation rights, restricted shares, restricted share units, and deferred share units of the 4,150,158 common shares is hereby ratified, confirmed, and approved. D, the shareholders of the corporation hereby expressly authorize the board of directors of the corporation in its discretion to make such amendments to the form of the A&R Omnibus Plan as it determines are necessary in order to satisfy the requirements or requests of any regulatory authority or stock exchange, including without limiting the generality of the foregoing, the TSX Venture Exchange, without requiring further approval of the shareholders. E, any one or more director of the officer of the corporation is authorized and directed on behalf of the corporation to take all necessary steps and proceedings and to execute, deliver, and file any and all declarations, agreements, documents, and other instruments, and do all such other acts and things, whether under corporate seal of the corporation or otherwise, that may be necessary or desirable to give effect to this ordinary resolution. And F, notwithstanding that this resolution has been duly passed by the shareholders of the corporation, the A&R Omnibus Plan is conditional upon receiving final approval from the exchange, and the directors of the corporation are hereby authorized and empowered to revoke this resolution without any further approval of the shareholders of the corporation at any time if such revocation is considered necessary or desired by the directors. And please don't ask me to repeat that. There you go. Can I have a second here?
Very impressive, Eric. I will second that motion.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor signify by raising their hand. Any contrary? Motion's carried unanimously. I hereby declare that the ordinary resolution to approve the corporation's new amended and restated omnibus plan has been passed by a majority of the votes cast by the disinterested shareholders at the meeting. So unless there is any further business to come before the meeting, I would entertain a motion to terminate this meeting.
I move that this meeting be terminated.
I second that motion.
All those in favor signify by raising their hand. Any to the contrary? So the motion is carried unanimously. So I thank you all for your attendance, and I hereby declare this meeting terminated. James, you're on mute.
Thanks, Bill. And thank you very much for taking us through the, at times, torturous process of going through those details. And Eric, excellent job. That was Eric Butel, one of our directors, who read the long motion, and Paul Pellegrini, one of our directors. They are three, and I make four of the 8 of us. All of us are online and participating in this meeting. The next data point is introduction of new director introductions. First, I'd like to point out, at the meeting a year ago, we had 3 new people join us. Paul Pellegrini, who was our seconder, was one of them. Nick Nanos, who many of you may remember and know because he's a high-profile guy, was our guest speaker at our annual meeting 3 years ago. And the third new director that joined us last year was Jane Pagel. All 3 have been fantastic additions, and we thank them for standing for re-election and look forward to their continued involvement. We also added a new director partway through the year. Going into last year's AGM, we had hoped to add a director nominated and suggested by Chris Wardle, our good friend at Lee Jones Gable. Unfortunately, the timing didn't work out at the AGM, but we met Hugh Cleland, who joined us a few months after the AGM, and he's been a fantastic addition to our board. So we welcome Hugh and thank him for his contribution so far, and we're thrilled that he's standing for re-election and will be involved in the business going forward. So on to the fourth, and in many ways, a reason people tune into this is for the management presentation. As I introduce Andrew, I always like to speak to the first slide, which will come up now. Forward-looking statements. Most companies, when they present, they skip over this slide. Personally, it's my favorite slide. I am a big shareholder. My mother, my brother, and all 3 of my sisters are shareholders in CHAR as well. Nieces and nephews, the list goes on. Andrew and I are the two biggest shareholders. Andrew's father, his mother, his stepfather, and lots of other people in his family are also shareholders. We closed a financing in March. I wrote a $50,000 check. That represented about, well, it was part of a $5 million raise. I've continued to write checks. So that was in March, that was last month. Last week, I bought stock in the market because I believe our stock price is undervalued today. I bought stock yesterday and I'm on the bid today. So my money is where my mouth is. I'm a big believer in this company. I expect Andrew and I to be the two biggest winners because we're the two biggest shareholders. All of the directors, all 8 participated in our financing in March. Several of our directors are buying stock in the market today. You can look at the insider reports and see that our forward-looking statement to you very clearly is we have our money where our mouth is, not just our hearts are in this, but also our checkbooks. Without further ado, if you want to flip to the next slide, Andrew, I'll pass the torch to you. The only thing I'll say as I introduce Andrew is he has done an outstanding job as our CEO. When we took the company public, Andrew was a young man relative to me and to Bill and to Eric and the rest. He is still a young man, but he has matured and showed wisdom beyond his age. He has been a fantastic guy that's gotten the business to where it's at. And he has our support in the background. He calls us when he needs us, which is from time to time and relatively often. But he is the captain of this ship, has been steering it. He has a board that's supportive, but he's our man. He's our day-to-day guy, and he's running this business 24/7. So with that in mind, I'll pass the torch to Andrew, who will take you through the management presentation.
Great. Thanks, James. And thanks everyone for tuning in. I know it's something we'd rather do in person, heralding back to the pre-pandemic CHAR AGMs that we had, but we still got great attendance here virtually. So I thank everyone for tuning in here. So I'm going to go through a few slides to remind those who may be new to the story what we're all about, and then I'll transition in and give a bit of a summary and highlight of what we've done over the last year and kind of what the next year is going to look like. So at the high level, CHAR is a leading clean tech development and environmental services company. So we'll talk about what that means. But the key aspect of our growth is our proprietary high temperature pyrolysis technology. So I'll focus most of the presentation on what that's all about. And really what it allows us to do is provide a technology, a solution that is carbon negative. So net, we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere. We've got a modular platform that plays a very important role on deployment, speed of deployment, and the fact that as we go through the presentation and talk about the outputs, be it RNG, which is renewable natural gas, green hydrogen, and biocarbons, all of those products can be made from the same modular piece of equipment. Since our last AGM, we've grown with 2 fantastic now existing clients, one being Canada's largest flat rolled steel producer, and the other is Hitachi Zosen and Nova in California with a green hydrogen project. As we bring the technology and continue to bring the technology forward, when I talk about market verticals in a few slides, one specific vertical is all about system sales and some recurring revenue from ongoing management fees and monitoring contracts. But the real growth opportunity is in our utility model, our design, build, own, operate model. And so I'll elaborate a little bit more on that. We do have a project pipeline that is valued over $100 million. And for us, pipeline is we've had those conversations with clients. We've provided an initial needs assessment. It's not just an initial lead, but it's a well-qualified in-process lead. And we don't have any long-term debt on the balance sheet, and we continue to maintain that. So on the financial overview, where were we in 2020 as we went into 21? The one thing I'd like to remind everyone is our fiscal year is September 30th. So our fiscal 2020 numbers include 2 pretty good pre-pandemic quarters and then 2, COVID quarters. And 21 includes, a full year of COVID that we're now coming out of. The important thing I think to point out is that while we saw the EBITDA loss or our cash burn increase a little bit, that was coupled with what we talked about at last year's AGM, this real focus on these design, build, own, operate opportunities. And since the last AGM, we've made some pretty great progress on that. So I'll talk a bit more about that. And of course, the financing we closed last year and the more recent one helped fuel that growth and that acceleration into what's going to really build this into a fantastic opportunity. So I want to quickly touch on Alltech, which is our environmental consulting group within the company. It was established in '86. It's a wholly owned subsidiary. But the key things to point out are it's a recurring business model with a lot of loyal repeat customers. The focus of our environmental consulting group is on environmental compliance, property due diligence, permitting, and carbon finance, which just so happen to be the key aspects of doing project development for our design, build, own, operate. So this operating group is generating revenue, is generating cash flow for the company, but it's also able to support internally our positioning towards these project development opportunities. So as a reminder for those, especially those who are new to the story, for those who have been following for a while, a refresher on what is high temperature pyrolysis. And when we talk about high temperature pyrolysis, we're really looking at it from three market verticals. So the first is wood and agriculture materials. So woody waste, things like wood chips or sawdust or that type of material. That's very much in the design, build, own, operate space. Second is biosolids. So biosolids are the leftovers from wastewater treatment plants. That is very much the technology sale position because we have a really good technology to destroy some of these persistent chemicals. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that piece of the business in today's presentation, but it is a piece and a piece that's going to bring in revenue for the company. And then third is digestate and compost. Digestate is very similar to compost, but it's a byproduct, a waste product from anaerobic digesters, biogas plants. So for anyone listening who follows the likes of some industry comps like Zeebec or Green Lane, their market that they serve is anaerobic digesters, biogas plants. So those facilities do still produce a compost-like material that we can process and add value to. So the graphic in the center here, that's our high temperature pyrolysis system. Basically all it is, pyrolysis means without oxygen, heating pyro without oxygen. And so high temperature for us is about 850 degrees Celsius. What that allows us to do is always produce two products, no matter what we're processing. One product is a gas, we call it syngas, that we can create energy out of, we can create green hydrogen out of it, we can create renewable natural gas out of it. The other is a biocarbon. In some instances, we can use that as a biocoal, so to offset coal in the steel industry. In others, it's a biochar, which allows us to sequester carbon in the soil and generate carbon credits. So overall, what we're looking at here, when we talk about decarbonizing for a circular economy, the circular economy aspect is those three feedstock market verticals on the left-hand side are all low value, negative value, residual material. So circular economy is all about taking low value byproducts and wastes and adding value to them. And decarbonizing is, of course, all about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So whether we're talking about renewable natural gas or green hydrogen, biocoal or biochar for carbon sequestration, all of those outputs decarbonize different industrial sectors. So that's where decarbonizing for a circular economy really fits the narrative and what high temperature pyrolysis is all about. So I want to talk a little bit more about the outputs in a second, but I just wanted to show a quick picture. This is our facility in London. And the other key aspect of the technology that I really want to make sure we're emphasizing and understanding is it's self-sustaining. So that third line down. So when we process materials, we're always producing a biocarbon and this syngas that we can take to these final products. But we can also take a small portion of that syngas, run it through our kiln to create the heat we need. So once we're operating, it's self-sustaining, it's closed loop from an energy perspective, which really reduces the OpEx on a facility. So when we look at outputs, the first one on the carbon side is the biocoal. And really the opportunity here and the need here is that 1 ton of fossil coal, when it's used, creates just under 3 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And when we look at the markets like steel, industry, metal processing, these markets need solid carbon as part of the chemistry of what goes on in that metals processing. So it's not just about, why can't the steel mills stop burning coal and burn natural gas or burn renewable natural gas? They're moving towards that from an energy perspective, but they still need solid carbon as an ingredient in the chemistry of making steel. And so that's where we have a really good opportunity to help them reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by replacing that fossil coal with our biocoal. And so I just want to prompt everyone to remember these coal consumption numbers. Keep in mind as I go through the presentation, the Canadian steel industry outside of Ontario needs 2 million. Within Ontario, we need another 1.7 million. And as we announced last year, we did get this first milestone order of 1,000 tons of biocoal, which we are continuing to fulfill, as that's for us a very, very large order, but it's a fantastic next step into the transition for steel producers to stop using as much coal and start using bio-based products. The other output on the gas side, our syngas we can use for 2 different applications. As I said, one is green hydrogen, the other is renewable natural gas. So on the green hydrogen piece, the thing I really want to point out here is that from Ontario's most recent low carbon hydrogen strategy, pyrolysis is specifically called out within that strategy. Actually, we're as a company mentioned in the strategy as well, which was fantastic to see. But using biomass, things like anaerobic digestate, compost, wood, bio solids is identified as a pathway to low carbon green hydrogen gas. And so that's crucial to get that recognition, because we don't have to go out and kind of explain why we're another type of green hydrogen. It's well understood. The other option for the syngas of our pyrolysis output is the renewable natural gas space. So for people familiar with renewable natural gas, or for those who aren't, as a reminder, it's basically chemically the same as natural gas, but it's made from renewable sources. So predominantly the way we get renewable natural gas today is through a technology called anaerobic digestion, which is also referred to as biogas. That can be fed by organic waste, so things like farm waste, food waste, green bin organic waste, that type of thing. Pyrolysis is a 2nd generation technology, and the key is that it can be fed by woody biomass. So, wood materials, whether it's wood waste or wood chips or sawdust or the like. And anaerobic digestion can't convert woody materials into RNG. And that's really, really important to keep in mind as I go through the next couple of slides here. Now, when we look at the market opportunity, I've just taken a couple of jurisdictions. There's definitely more, but British Columbia, Quebec, California, and Oregon for our examples here all have RNG targets. So these percentages are percentages of the natural gas grid that is renewable natural gas. And it's presented in million gigajoules per year. The only thing to keep in mind is a gigajoule is an energy unit. And to give it a little bit of context, an average Ontario home uses about 8.5 gigajoules a year. So if we look at Quebec's target of 22 million gigajoules per year in the natural gas grid being renewable, that would be the equivalent of supplying 2.5 million Ontario homes, which is great. Now, if we look at the current state of the market, in the United States in 2020, there was 157 biogas to renewable natural gas plants. Those plants produced over 62 million gigajoules of renewable natural gas, which is the equivalent of over 459 million gallons of diesel, which is great. I mean, this is a lot of greenhouse gas emissions being offset by renewable products. But we look at it from a market perspective, 62 million gigajoules is roughly the demand of Oregon and Quebec. It's less than twice the demand of just British Columbia. So there's a huge, huge need for renewable natural gas. There's a lot of biogas to RNG plants, these anaerobic digesters, but there's a tremendous demand that really still needs to be supplied here. And so when we look at where RNG will come from, I've presented an example here from Quebec because it was a really good study that was commissioned by the government of Quebec and was completed by Deloitte and WSP. And so what we're looking at here is the traditional biogas, which is fed by things like agricultural plant biomass, residual agri-food, so those green bin organic waste, and landfills. And you can see that in 2018, the estimate, this is in petajoules, which is 1 million gigajoules. So the numbers from the previous slide is equivalent here. Within Quebec, technical and economic potential is just over 25. And recall the demand in Quebec was a little over 20, it was 22 million gigajoules. So it can just meet Quebec's demand if it's fully utilized. Now, if we look at what the opportunity from things like woody biomass do, we look at those traditional anaerobic digesters, they're down here. When we start to add in woody materials, these three categories here, we get it all the way up to over 140. So the potential to produce RNG, if it's just anaerobic digesters, is about 25. If we add pyrolysis, it goes from 25 to 140. And these materials are all being produced today. So non-merchantable wood is when a forestry company goes in, cuts down a tree, and it's the part of the log is bent or it's got a knot in it or whatever. It happens to be that part of the tree can't be used, can't be sold. So it's non-merchantable. Harvesting residues are things like tree branches, tree tops, basically parts of the tree when the trees are being harvested that can't be used for forestry products. And then processing residue is things like sawdust and wood chips. It's and bark. It's kind of the leftovers at the mill as material is being produced. And so another important thing to remember here is, while Quebec's demand is kind of in the 25 range, so when we're processing woody materials, we're well above what Quebec's demand will be. Once the gas is in the pipeline, it can be sold anywhere in North America. So building some projects in Quebec and Ontario, that gas can be sold to Quebec and Ontario, but it could also be sold into California, where they need 144 million gigajoules of RNG. So this is a really needed technology. Anaerobic digestion is good technology. It's great to use all these organic waste like food waste and manure, but there's just not enough of those waste materials to create this volume of gas. And so to kind of highlight it, this is the existing anaerobic digestion to RNG market. And this is the market potential with high temperature pyrolysis to renewable natural gas. So now to talk about our active projects. All of these are new since our last AGM, where we really started to focus on these design, build, own, operate opportunities. Of the 4 active projects that I'll talk about, 3 of them are design, build, own, operate, so they would be CHAR plants. These 3 would produce over 1 million, so 1.25 million gigajoules per year of renewable natural gas. So that's enough for about 147,000 Ontario homes. They would also produce 25,000 tons a year of biocarbon. Recall the demand in Canada and in Ontario and Quebec is in the over 3 million. So there is still a huge demand for biocarbon, but this starts to put a little bit of a dent in it. And these 3 design, build, own, operate projects, once operational, would represent 44 million a year in revenue. Now, these plants are being deployed modularly. So each site will have 1 or 2 what we call a kiln train. So it's that high temperature pyrolysis kiln and the gas processing and upgrading. And then being identical, modular, deployable means we can have the same design. We can do factory built acceptance testing. We can deliver to site. We don't have to build plants on site. And once the plant is operational and cash flowing, we can double the size of it by adding more modules once the plant's operating. So these are our active projects. We're working on a number of other projects with some partners in Quebec and in Ontario, but these are the ones that are most well developed to talk about today. So to talk first about our project in California, This is the one that's under development with Hitachi Zosa and Innova at their existing anaerobic digestion facility. This is a picture of their plant in San Luis Obispo. This plant's being built under a BOOT model, which is build, own, operate, transfer, which means Hitachi will be the eventual and final owner of the plant. We're looking to get into commissioning later this year. And not too long ago, Hitachi announced building of their 100th CompoGas facility. So this is what this type of technology is called. So once built and proven, we have a great avenue into Hitachi's sales pipeline, both for their existing facilities and for new build facilities. So this plant will be processing 18,000 tons per year of this compost anaerobic digestate, and it will be producing biochar, which we will leverage to develop carbon credits from, as well as green hydrogen. Our project in St. Félicien is a design, build, own, operate, so that'll be a CHAR facility. It's being built adjacent to an existing biomass power plant. So this is a plant fed by wood waste to make electricity. You can see it in the picture here. The nice thing about this opportunity is it gives us the ability to deploy it in a phased approach where we can basically build half the plant, start selling that syngas, and recall syngas is what comes out of our reactors, our pyrolysis kilns. We can start selling it directly to the power plant, allowing us to start generating revenue while we build out the rest of the facility. So we do have supply, offtake, land purchase, option agreements all in process. So all of them have LOIs in place. We're looking for shovels in early 23, pending project finance. And this plant would process about 35,000 tons per year of woody biomass, which would produce 5,000 tons per year of biocarbon. Our phase one would be 250,000 gigajoules of syngas. And then phase two, once we've got that into the pipeline and upgraded to renewable natural gas, it's 250,000 gigajoules per year of that. And you can see how the revenue differences when we can start selling the renewable natural gas from this facility. Thorold is the second design, build, own, operate facility that's really well developed. This facility, it's on the Welland Canal. You can kind of see the boat going through there. Supply offtake agreements are all in process. So we've got LOIs again for the feed supply and the offtakes. We have, the building and site lease in place. This is another phased approach one where we expect to move our existing operations. So the picture I showed you of our existing plant to this site. And then as part of a phase two is expand that out and produce much more material. So this plant would process about 75,000 tons per year of woody biomass, and it would output 10,000 tons a year of biocarbon and 500,000 gigajoules per year of RNG. And Kirkland Lake is the equivalent size to Thorold. So when I talk about modules, both Thorold and Kirkland Lake are 2 modules per site. This site is really great from an access to feedstock perspective. It's adjacent to an existing sawmill, which is a feedstock supplier. There really is an abundance of feedstock in the area. We have supply, offtake, land purchase, option agreements all in process with LOIs, and we're hoping for shovels by mid-23, depending again on project finance. So what does the future hold for CHAR in the near term? As a clean tech company providing innovative environmental solutions to really decarbonize for a circular economy, we do have a phenomenally massive growth opportunity. Outputs of renewable natural gas, green hydrogen, biocoal, biochar, they're all in massive demand right now. Our sales pipeline is quite robust. We have now 3 design, build, own, operate projects that are well underway. Those are all new since last year's AGM, so they've come together quite quickly, which I think is both a testament to the technology, maturity of the technology, its capabilities, as well as the demand. Having a modular system lets us focus on a rapid scaling to get to larger processing capacity instead of trying to build sort of a massive plant right out of the gate. And public support for clean tech to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and protect the environment. As James was saying, in the Globe, it's a daily article on clean tech, on greenhouse gas emissions, on climate action, and we're very well situated in that space. So with that, I think James is going to now jump in and moderate some questions.
Great job, Andrew. And I have got a couple of people who have emailed or texted me or used the live chat, some questions. We're open to more questions if you like. I've got enough, sort of for 5 minutes. We've got maybe 10 to 12 minutes of questions. Diane, if you want to prepare yourself, you've got probably 10 to 12 minutes of questions. Andrew, the first one, I love this question because it started with just you. And I remember meeting you 7 or 8 years ago and it was just you. How many people is CHAR now? How big is the team? Can you talk about what CHAR has turned into as a business and talk about the team?
For sure, yeah. And I mean, a lot of the progress we've made over the last year is certainly a testament to the team, to their commitments and their expertise. We are at 22 people now. We've got a couple of active recruitment projects going on. Labor market's a little tight, but we're confident we'll find the right people. So in the next 6 months or so, I expect us to be closer to 25.
Okay, the next question. Next question was: are other markets of interest, specifically Europe? So maybe you can talk about Quebec, Ontario, and then where do we go next, or when do we go next? What do you see as the future markets?
Yeah, Europe is always interesting, but there's so much opportunity and demand, even just in Ontario and Quebec, that we can build projects out and supply the North American market, that we really, kind of don't need to try and compete in another space. I always like the concept of blue ocean versus red ocean, and for pyrolysis in North America, that would be a blue ocean of kind of huge opportunity, first mover advantage, and not a lot of competition. Europe tends to be a little more red ocean, a little bit more competition. They've got different market dynamics. So interesting, yes. Watching it, yes. If the right partner came along to help deploy in Europe, absolutely look at it. But our focus is certainly in the North American space right now.
And other questions come in, which I think is a great one. How easy or difficult will it be to finance the build of the DBOO project, which is design, build, own, operate? Yeah,
no, it's a great question because each of these projects is not capital light. It's on a capital efficiency perspective, dollars of capital per GJ. It's better than an anaerobic digester, but it still takes dollars to build these projects. So a couple of the project opportunities, we have some support programs. I mean, it's no secret there's a lot of provincial and federal support for this type of project. So that's a piece of it. The other pieces that come into play that we're actively pursuing is project finance, both at a project level between debt and equity. When you have the ability to have long-term offtake agreements for one of your output products, in our case, the renewable natural gas, it becomes a very well-fundable project opportunity because you've got that security of offtake. So, absolutely, we're pursuing a number of avenues on the project finance, from government debt, government grants, private equity, project finance type of opportunities.
Okay, so this one came on the chat, so I believe everyone can see this question. On the 1,000-ton project for the steel company, how many tons have been delivered to date? When will the 1,000 tons be fulfilled? What happens after the 1,000 tons? It goes on, but I think you get the gist of the question.
Yeah, so we're expecting to deliver the remainder of the order by the end of the calendar year. This has been part of a development process with our steel partner. So as part of it, they asked us to run a few different types of materials. So, we can't pump it out now that we've all established what we're going to make it out of. We can get that, final bit of production done by the end of the calendar year. And really, this is just sort of the next step as we move forward with our partners. So be it building a facility on their site or be it servicing them from our sites that we're developing in places like Thorold, they're both still on the table, and it'll likely be a combination. If you remember kind of the Ontario Steel industry consumption of 1.7 million tons a year. Our Thorold plant will produce 25,000 tons a year. If we were to build something on site, that would be, another 25,000, 50,000 tons a year. The focus has also changed a little bit. It's sort of been publicly announced that a number of Ontario steel producers have received pretty substantial funding to shift from blast furnace steelmaking to electric arc furnace, DRI electric arc furnace technology. That technology still needs some solid carbon. So we've been producing carbon also to meet that need, which is a slightly different spec. We need to make a slightly different type of carbon. So we've been splitting our production between the original blast furnace order and doing this electric arc furnace work. So well in process, great partnership. And it's really all about listening to, in this case, as it's part of a development cycle, listening to what the client wants and being adaptive to that need.
Just for everyone listening, we've got about half a dozen more questions come in. I think we're only going to have time to answer probably 4 or 5 of them. So please, no more questions unless it's a really important one. We'll try to get through the ones that we've gotten. Can you expand on the Thorold project, Andrew? Its cost, nature of any strategic partners that you have on it?
For sure. So we do have a strategic on the feedstock supply side. So, the nice thing about the location is we're looking at a couple of potential feedstocks. One of them, of course, being what we would call, pallet wood or woody materials. And these are, basically end of life shipping pallets. So, we partner with a strategic who can supply us with that clean type of wood waste, as well as, they've got a pretty well-established logistics process through the north of Ontario to bring other woody biomass down to that facility. And the other thing being on the Welland Canal gives us some opportunities on how we move biomass that from the north to supplement what we're able to get from this pallet wood, as well as move material to some of our steelmaking clients. On an overall kind of economics basis, the plant is going to be on the order of $30 million. That's in this particular site, it's got basically all the utility connections. It's got a lot of the balance of plant stuff like truck scales. So it's got a lot of infrastructure in place, which really helps keep the focus on just building the pyrolysis systems and the output capabilities.
Okay, next question. Can you outline the competition CHAR will eventually face for the feedstock going into the plants and how CHAR might defend its sourcing?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a good question because it's something that we're seeing in the anaerobic digestion biogas space now that there's kind of a certain level of saturation. They're seeing demand for their materials, but the key difference, I mean, there's a couple of big differences, but one of the key differences between an anaerobic digestion biogas plant being fed by, say, food waste and a CHAR high temperature pyrolysis wood to RNG facility is the anaerobic digesters, part of their business model is a tip fee. So they get paid to collect material. So when there's more and more demand for the material, the tip fee drops and a big piece of the revenue for that plant, that anaerobic digestion plant, comes to be at risk. For our facilities, our feedstock is a cost. And so from a defense of supply perspective, that's number one, is that we have a price we're paying for this material. So we're not reliant on, okay, give it to us for free or pay us to take it. We're paying for it because it has that value. And if you recall, the sheer volume of material that is being produced right now is pretty substantial. But the other feedstock security strategy we're employing is, if you look at both Thorold and Kirkland Lake in particular, in Thorold, we have a strategic partner for feedstock supply. In Kirkland Lake, we're right next door to a feedstock supplier and talking about integrating their material supply into ours while still buying other material. We don't want to be, sole source either. And even in St. Felicien, we're on site with a biomass fired power plant who are experts in feedstock sourcing. So it's absolutely a crucial aspect of these plants, and each of these projects, we have partners involved who can help ensure security of supply.
Okay, we're already over time. We've got 5 questions left. I'm just going to ask one of them. Logan Randalls, John Day, Abe Dyke, and Russell Pearson all have excellent questions. I'm hoping Sarah, who's our tech person, if we could capture those questions and we will deliver answers to those. Furthermore, any other questions that anyone has that come up afterwards, Andrew and I are always delighted to answer questions. So I'm sorry we didn't get to those. The last one I'm going to ask, Andrew, someone asked about analyst coverage. When is CHAR going to have analyst coverage? I believe we have one that we can talk about, and we've been working on others. Maybe you can talk about that, and then we'll close off the questions and move on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we've been talking to a number of analysts to get them up to speed on the story, to keep them abreast of what we're doing. 8 Capital has initiated coverage on us, and we certainly hope a few more will follow suit over the next 12 months.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. If we can flip the slide to our next slide. We are very pleased to have Diane Brady join us. I first met Diane back, well, I met her in 1988. I didn't know her the first time I saw her speak. I was in the audience at the National Debating Championships in 1987. I was in the audience in the final because I lost in the quarterfinal. I was the top rookie and the national champion that year. I got to watch Diane wipe the floor with the team on the other side of the floor, and she was crowned national champion. In 1988, I met her at the World Championships in Sydney, Australia. Both of us represented Canada, and we've been friends ever since, I'd like to think, and I'm delighted to have her speak. She's had an illustrious career as a journalist, interviewed dozens and hundreds of famous people, and has interesting perspectives. And Diane, without further ado, the floor is yours. Sorry, Diane. We welcome questions. The questions, if you want to send them straight away or during Diane's presentation, and just like we did with Andrew, we'll keep it open during. So over to you, Diane.
Great. And of course, if you had any questions for Andrew that he didn't answer, feel free to put them to me and I'll do my best to answer them on his behalf. So thank you, James. And yes, I guess I was sort of the Lucille Ball of the debating circuit, and James was probably some combination of, Brad Pitt meets Dale Carnegie, and you never knew what he was selling, but you were always willing to buy it, which is of course one of the reasons I'm here. But the more I discovered about CHAR, certainly, the more excited I am to be talking to you. And if Nick Nanos is on the call, I'll just tell him that we used to call him Thor. So with that, let me move on. And let me also, first of all, thank your CEO, Andrew White, who in true servant leader style is doing the slides for me because I was not able to upload themselves. So thank you very much. I think that's a testament to your willingness to do what it takes to get things done. So I did go to sleep last night thinking about high temperature pyrolysis, learning more about what CHAR does, and really interested in where it fits with what I've been hearing from leaders. So in this conversation, I'd like to talk a little bit about what I have learned, I guess through interviewing thousands of leaders at this point, James. It's been a long career thus far. I'm at Forbes, but I have been at the Wall Street Journal, at Maclean's, Bloomberg, Business Week. We all just trade business cards. It's a very small community. And I'm also happy to see that you've got some business in Saint Felicien, where it brought up fond memories of a Ontario-Quebec summer exchange, where I believe I learned poker, some curse words, and I think I had the best bread I'd ever tasted. So you certainly picked well there. So first, a disclosure. Well, one disclosure is the images here. They're from the public domain Facebook accounts. I seek forgiveness because CHAR is doing important work, and I think that means all bets are off here. And of course, I'm not being paid, although it's heartening to know that your last guest speaker got a board seat. So thank you in advance for that. But I've got the unit up here. This was my first real boss. The man in this picture is Mustafa Tolba, and he was at the time the head of the UN Environment Program, which was my first foray into environmentalism. I was a student at the University of Nairobi, and he somehow thought I would be a great speechwriter. And I remember the first speech, it was around the time of chlorofluorocarbons and a lot of talk about desertification. And his one piece of advice to me was make it funny. And to do a speech on homelessness in Caracas and to try to make it funny made me realize that speech writing was not for me. But what it did teach me, it did give me a lifelong interest in environmentalism. It's made me fascinated with the trajectory that I've seen around the conversation, which I'll talk about a little later, if we call this a speech. And I think it did give me an appreciation for what Dr. Tolba was saying, which is it can't be medicine. It has to be relevant. It has to be inclusive, and where possible, perhaps make it funny. So next slide. Thank you very much. So this is more about me. I'm not actually in this picture, of course. This is part of the Canadian content part of my presentation. This is the spoons, for those of you old enough to remember it. That guy with the big hair there is named Rob Pruce. And this is the reason I first became a journalist. Was I started a column in the Burlington Post when I was 15 years old because I wanted to meet my favorite band, which was at the time the Spoons, 3 of whom had gone to my high school, which fun fact, I think was a little hard up for famous alumni because we put the woman who killed John Belushi on that list when I went to one of our reunions. So, but this is what motivates me as a journalist. And this is something that I think has made my career so interesting, and why I'm always fascinated to meet leaders of companies like CHAR to get a sense of what's around the corner. So next slide, by the way, let me show you. This is Rob Pruce then. This is Rob Pruce today. Besides having Sean Cassidy follow me on Twitter, I believe having Rob Pruce friend me was one of the highlights of my the last decade. So he is now doing music in Broadway. Life is long, but yet at the same time, these are chapters that all come together now because of social media. So as we know, I think the world has changed, and a guy that I used to have to chase down the library is now somebody who apparently is my friend. We haven't met much, but still good to know. So next slide, Andrew. Okay, my 10,000 hours. This is more Canadian content. Of course, this is Malcolm Gladwell, whom some of you may know personally, or certainly we know from the news. I think my 10,000 hours, I was thinking about it because I think it's important. I think it is asking questions and trying to understand what makes people tick, and when possible, connecting the dots to help them see what's around the corner. That's what prompted me to be a business journalist. That's what continues to drive me today. As James knows, I had a brief foray into being an entrepreneur, utterly failed. It was like a media entrepreneur. So those two words, of course, rarely go together well. But I've always come back to the idea of connecting people to create bigger pies. So that's why I want to talk about what I've learned from talking to leaders over the years, and just some observations that I hope might be interesting for the current climate. So next slide, please. So curiosity, I've got the 2 people on this stage here is Jack Welch, the iconic, certainly complicated former leader of GE, and Jeff Immelt, who was brought in for a 20-year run and didn't quite make it. And I guess the difference, there are many differences between these 2 men, and I did cover both of them, was I think that what struck me about Jack Welch was his intense curiosity, not just about the outside world, but about the people in his organization. This was a guy who could go really deep. He would know who was doing plastics, in Massachusetts. He would know what was going on in China. He would know who he was meeting and why. And I think that genuine curiosity is something that I remember Barry Diller once saying he could count the number of people on one hand who he'd met in his life who were genuinely curious. They were curious not just to ask the first question, but the second and the third. They were curious about the people in the room they didn't know. And they were curious about, they were always a bit paranoid that something was going on that they didn't know about. The reason I think Jeff Immelt was curious, obviously in a different way, very external facing. But I'd say one of the things that I noticed about his leadership was he didn't know as much about his own company. He didn't know as much about his own people. And I think that that is one of the reasons that I felt he certainly didn't have the same degree of a cult-like following within his company. Again, maybe the world had changed, but that real knowledge of the team, that understanding that the real job of a leader is what? It's to set the vision and strategy of the company. It's to replace yourself, Andrew, as you probably know, through succession planning. And it's to not just pick the leadership team, but to know when to drill deep and to know the talent that you have and to know that that's ultimately your biggest asset. So that's one of the things I think I've learned very much from a lot of great leaders across the world. Next slide, please. I mentioned connecting the dots. This is John Chambers, who I did a book with, full disclosure. Great book, by all means buy it. It's probably $2 used on Amazon, so you'll get a bargain. And I have Martha Stewart there partly to prove I did a cover, but she's also somebody who I think of as connecting the dots. And what do I mean by that? I think it's that ability to take disparate, seemingly disparate points of information and to connect them together to help us understand what's coming. I've always thought people don't need more content. There's a tsunami of content out there. Everybody can be their own media company. What we want is we want context and we want intelligence. And John, in my opinion, was masterful at this. It may have been partly because he's dyslexic. So he had this pattern thinking brain of A, B, D, C. Partly it could have been that he liked to kind of play the chess game out to the end and think of all the different moves. But I think that an ability to connect the dots takes you from being one of many router companies in the early 90s to understanding that you're building the internet. It takes you from somebody who likes to be a caterer in Connecticut to somebody who wants to really raise the, the art and the science of homemaking to something that you could bring to every American. It's that ability to think bigger and to also, next slide, please. Connect with us as human beings. Now, this looks like humble bragging, and I suppose in a way it is, but what's interesting to me about Hillary Clinton, prior to the recent, not so recent presidential elections, I used to interview Donald Trump a fair bit and interviewed Hillary Clinton. And I would say Donald Trump was beyond accessible, so accessible. If you had a call whose favorite cookie, he would call you back in 2 minutes. No piece of press was too small for Donald Trump, and incredibly flattering. He loved the media. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, did not. She knew you were press, it was as if you had a stand back 200 feet sign. And what changed was when I did take off my press hat and I started to do things as an entrepreneur. This is my brief entrepreneur phase here, where I moderated a conversation with Secretary Clinton about fair pay. She was funny, she was warm, she was the kind of person you'd love to hang out with for an evening. I so wish I had seen that person when I had my press hat on. I so wish we had seen more of that person during election campaigns. I think the greatest leaders that I have met really understand that need to connect as human beings and to really understand that it's about being vulnerable. It's about trusting until you don't have to trust again. And I think it's about sharing things about yourself that aren't just the bottom line. I'll give you an example. Sorry for my water here. Yesterday, well, I guess it was the day before yesterday, I was interviewing the CIO of Blue Shield, California. And she happened to mention she'd started her career in Key West at, I forget that, it was basically she'd worked with the US Marshals and counterintelligence, and she was a protocol officer. And I said, how did you get there? And she goes, she started talking about her ex-husband and forcing them to move to Key West. And it just became, all of a sudden, it's like the room lit up. It was so human. It was so funny. And what an interesting start to a career. But to know the fact that she didn't plan to end up in Key West, she wanted to be in Washington, just added a whole layer of complexity and humanity to her that I think is, makes us likable. I'll give you one other example, which is I used to go to the APEC CEO Summit a lot. And I was, because maybe I'm cheap, I'd put all of my clothes into the free laundry that was offered by the hotel, which meant that essentially every dress came back the size of an American Girl dress, which meant I could not wear it. There became this campaign at the summit to find a dress that Diane could wear. Finally, somebody in the Russian delegation had a dress that I could wear. And the fact that it was the only time I think I ever got a standing ovation coming on stage, simply because I wasn't wearing a caftan, which was all that was available at the store in Bali. And that just, the humanity of that, the fact that all of these leaders were suddenly going through their wardrobe, women leaders, mind you, it just added a layer of the fact that we're human beings, we're funny, we're flawed. And I like to think about the fact the most memorable leaders I've met, the most memorable moments I've had are the ones where we connect as human beings. So next slide, please. It's like, and a sense of mission. So who do we have here? Well, the head of Shopify, again, Canadian content, Elon Musk, who we like, I believe was in Canada for at least long enough for us to claim him. Indra Nooyi, formerly of PepsiCo, and Paul Pullman. This does segue to sustainable leadership and what we're talking about today. And I know certainly Andrew and the team at CHAR, you clearly have a sense of mission. I think that that is something that is increasingly important, is this sense that you are not just meeting for investors, you're meeting for stakeholders. You're not just, when we talk about double and triple bottom lines, it's really about how do you measure success and how do you measure impact. And that's increasingly, as you know better than me, what everybody in your ecosystem demands. It's what the portfolio managers demand. It's what your customers demand, your kids demand, your employees. I can't overemphasize the fact that that sense of mission has to be embedded in every company, big and small, because that's what people want to work for. And it's what we want to see, that it's no longer enough to make a lot of money. Next slide, please. Sustainability. So with this, I just want to mention sort of how I feel the conversation has changed when I talk to people. So climate leadership. First of all, I think certainly we're talking less about what will it take, to get to 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, because, the issues are here with us today. There's only so long you can put sunscreen on grapes in California before you start to wonder about the health of the wine industry. I think the conversation has shifted very much to resilience, which is you can't predict what's coming. How well can you deal with the various factors that are coming? And circularity has become a lot more of the conversation. I'm wearing my Eileen Fisher top today. She was one of the first people in business I knew who really appreciated circularity, and it was considered quite daring at the time that she was inviting people to bring back their sweaters, to repurpose them, to resell them. I think circularity is one of the things that has become part of the conversation, because it's this urgency in this sense that we have to actually fundamentally shift the way we operate, more so than simply reduce, recycle, reuse, and do our best to reduce our carbon footprints. Second, the S part, social impact. I think inclusion in a truly meaningful sense is something that everybody is struggling with, because it's hard. Let's face it, it's very hard. In terms of Black Americans, the pandemic, in addition to it coinciding with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and this sense of racial injustice that has to be corrected, it was especially hard in terms of healthcare outcomes for Black Americans, in the workplace, less engaged. I think that reality of the fact that we're not getting it right yet says something about how much are we having a social impact? Who aren't we talking to? Who doesn't have a voice in the conversation and who's not at the table? And I think one of the challenges with all of us, I see in leaders, again, big and small, is mini-me syndrome, that tendency we have to recognize excellence in a form that reminds us of ourselves. And I think the leaders I've seen who truly get out of their comfort zones, who truly appreciate the value of diversity, I think those are the ones who are going to be the great leaders of the future, because people notice, people care, and there's no hiding anymore. And then governance, of course, I talked about stakeholder capitalism. I know it's been branded many times, inclusive capitalism, participatory capitalism. Cannot be performative. There are a lot of stakeholders. I know that this is a board meeting, and kudos to you. I see you have women on your board. One thing I think is very important is not just seats at the table and seeing people as customers, but are those voices also represented in some of the, whether it's the boards, the meetings, the gatherings that matter. And that's, again, something that I think is becoming increasingly important. So let me move to the next slide.
Diane, I hate to interrupt you. I don't know how many slides you have left, but we are already over time, and there's at
Then
least
let me
one
go very
question.
quickly. This is good because I'm going to go in like rapid fire order, because of course I'm Forbes. I have to say something. Let me just, we'll go through quickly with Forbes in 1 minute, which is, what do I do? Communities. So next slide, Andrew. This is a gathering we had in Abu Dhabi. So let me just, I'm going to tell you what communities is, which is communities. I lead the team that does the 30 under 30. So we do entrepreneurship, founders, ForbesWomen, Forbes the Culture, which is Black and Brown entrepreneurship, as well as all of our C-suite communities. And what we mean by communities in that respect is it's not to gather together like-minded people in similar professions. It's getting people to the table to have conversations that matter and to build content, multi-platform content around that, for that. So this isn't a good example, and then I'll end with this, which is, this is our 30 under 30 community we brought together with 50 over 50, which is global women who are achieving some of their greatest accomplishments over 50. And we created a mentoring event in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi. And that is the beauty to me of what community means. It's creating a village green for smart conversations and really focusing on the issues that matter, so that we're not just helping leaders be smarter about what's ahead, but our readers as well. So I'm going to leave it at that. And thank you again. And thank you, of course, Andrew, for stepping in to help me with the slides. And if you have questions, I'll take them. So thanks for having me come.
Diane, we only have a couple minutes, so I'm going to go straight to it. So I love this question came in. Why do you care about CHAR other than your personal relationship?
I think that it's important. I love the idea, first of all, of the circularity. I think that true innovation is something that we need right now. And I'm very curious, more, frankly, James, you put it on my radar. I'm very curious about what do we do to actually fundamentally shift the supply chain, to fundamentally shift the way we manufacture, the way we create energy. And CHAR is one of the more innovative examples that I've seen. And I also think that you're very connected to where it matters, which is, for this to happen, you need to have a playbook and a model that scales and can be replicated at scale. So that's another aspect. So it's what the world needs.
I'm abridging a question, one more question I'm going to ask you, and then there's a third that came in. Government and business, usually there's a disconnect. Do you think they're actually, and I'm paraphrasing from the question because it's longer, do you think that you're actually going to get from this government action to business and things like CHAR are going to be commercialized?
I think there's no question that policy plays such a key role in driving change. You can't rely simply on profit incentives and everything else. So I think that's one aspect. You are seeing more public-private partnerships. I think one of the things that we often talk about what the private sector can bring to the public sector. I don't think there's as much attention to what the lessons of the public sector are to the private sector, which is, if you're in the public sector, you can't move forward until you have agreement from everybody. So it feels sclerotically slow at times, but when they get agreement, they move. And so now that you're seeing governments move, and we know at different speeds, I think that's going to be a powerful driver of innovation. And it's going to be a powerful sense of who's going to win. We all win when a company like CHAR does well. Let me mention one other quick thing. With all the attention to the Ukraine and Putin and Xi Jinping, we're not getting as much of a news right now out of the innovation that's going on in China. And I think it's accelerating. Obviously, it's a very different regime. There's a certain, if they want to build it, it will come. I think that I'm very interested in what's happening in China. And I think Canada has also been, in my mind, certainly ahead of the curve in some respects in the US, and truly having more of a government, driver, which you need to have this innovation not only be accepted, but commercialized and supported, which it needs.
Last question. And it's not favorite, okay, because it's very specific in the question, capitalized. Who's the most interesting person that you've ever interviewed? You had to pick the most interesting. Who would it be?
I can't. Look, I'll tell you who. Like I found 50 Cent fascinating, and Snoop Dogg. I love both. Who knew? Great, wonderful, warm human beings. Very smart. I've interviewed a lot of leaders. The Sultan of Jakarta was such a pivotal figure when Suharto was falling. I remember meeting a Hezbollah guy in Kashmir from Scarborough, Ontario, who was, I have to admit, delightful and funny, so it's that in some ways it's that disconnect between our stereotype of people and who they turn out to be, and you wonder, how did they get to this position? But I can't pick one most interesting person. I will tell you, it's not the people that are designated as interesting. It's usually the ones that you don't expect. You take the time to sit down and you discover there's a whole world in there that we haven't been tapping.
Thanks, Diane. That's a great finish. And I'll tell you that I'm not going to ask the question of the difference between CHAR generating hydrogen versus renewable natural gas, because I figured that would have put you on your back feet. But
I'd deflect. But thank you for having me.
It's all good. So thanks again to Diane. This concludes our call. We hope to be back in person next year. My parting thought, I've been involved with CHAR for 7 or 8 years. Cleantech Capital started the capital pool, which merged with CHAR around the same time. A lot of people said to me, oh, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I've decided in the last year, it's not a marathon. It's an Ironman competition. We finished the swim, I think, 1.5 years ago. We're about halfway through the bike ride, but we've still got a marathon in front of us, but we're committed to it. We've got the resources, we've got a great team, and I'm feeling very good about it. And that's why I'm still an investor, not just with past investment, but I'm continuing to invest in the business. And I hope everyone on this call understands that the team is here and committed, not just next year's annual meeting, but in the meantime, we welcome your questions, your input, and we hope to have ongoing investor involvement. So thanks again to all for attending, and thanks for being part of our Ironman competition as investors. And hopefully we'll all be celebrating down the road. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at next year's AGM.